Now, the next thing that I want to introduce to you requires that you bring your A game in terms of thinking, because I want to sort of make some distinctions that sometimes have appeared very subtle, hidden. It's not easy to grasp them. We've dealt with approaches to apologetics, haven't we? Now, we dealt with fideism. We said that's this apologetic approach that sort of takes things on faith. We've also compared it to experientialism. Because I feel it's right, for me, I'm going to accept it. So really, can we put it this way? Fideism or experientialism are apologetic approaches that are based on, watch this, subjective feeling. When we talk of something subjective, we mean it is something, and again I'm going to use a difficult word here, is something esoteric. Oh, forget that. Something subjective is something that I feel to be true. Fred may not feel that to be true, okay? But I feel it to be true. We call that a subjective reality. Now, let me give an example of that. Again, what I try to do is before I move into the next step, I'm always recapping something we did before. Just so that we are... My teacher used to tell me, the best teaching is repetition, okay? But repetition without monotony. Repetition without monotony. You're saying the same thing in different angles. You're coming at it in different ways. That's what I'm doing all through. So let me give an example here in terms of fideism and experientialism. Why is it that if I'm a Luo and I am one, and you're Luya, we share many cultures? This is a fact. For example, if you're married, can your mother come and sleep on your bed? Even the house that your mother and father lived in and died, can you live in that house with your wife? It's taboo, isn't it? But do you know that's happening everywhere in other cultures? Oh, my mother and father lived here, that's where I'm moving in to live. In fact, if my mother comes and I'm not there and my wife is there, my wife can actually give my mother my bed to sleep in. Other cultures have no problem with that. You see, I saw that smug on your face. It's abominable in your mind. But is that an objective reality? No, it's not. It's a subjective reality. It is something that is to you, it's personal to you. It is true for you, not necessarily to another. So when we say fideism or experientialism is an epistemological issue that is personal to people. I know this, and for me it is true. By the way, you tell somebody that, say, hey, death will come. Ishira, I think they say. Yes? Death will come, misfortune will come, and they are convinced, they are persuaded in their minds. Yet the same thing is happening to another person, death is not coming. So that's the difference between subjective and objective reality. Now, ladies and gentlemen, am I standing here? Am I standing here? Yes. That's an objective reality. It doesn't depend on your opinion, okay? It doesn't. Whether you think or you don't think, I'm standing here. That's an objective reality. And that would have taken us to another debate on realism and nominalism, but that's another matter for another time. So we're saying, in terms of fideism, the distinguishing feature is subjective feeling. So let's call that fideism or experientialism. But we also talked about an epistemological approach. Now again, I'm using that word epistemological because I've explained it again and again and again. Zacchaeus, when I say epistemological, what do I mean? You forgot? You know, I keep forgetting. William, Edward, Matthew, come on. I got it. So I've rescued myself. I got it. So Matthew, when I say epistemological, what do I mean? Oh, this is not good. Wilfred, can you help these people? Epistemological.
Yeah, I think it is those things that we have evidence in terms of seeing them.
No. You're looking at the word empirical.
Oh,
yeah. Epistemology.
The foundation by which?
By which?
That argument existed from or starting from.
No, the first part of your sentence is correct, not the second part. It was simply
of knowing what you.
exactly. How do we know what we know? Okay. How do we know what we know? So when I talk about epistemological foundation of fideism or experientialism, it is what? Subjective feeling. I feel it, I experience it, therefore it is true. That's an epistemological foundation. But there's another epistemological foundation that has to do with what we called, again, I'm not saying anything new from what I've been saying last week and in the first lecture. I'm only repeating it in a different way. It's like the other day I came through the front door, today I'm coming through the back door. But I'm entering the same house. There is this epistemological foundation that depends on what we call empirical data. Now, again I'm going to ask a question. When we say empirical, what do we mean? Now you can answer, Mr. Mukenya. Empirical. No, you already put it in terms of epistemology. You substituted him. Empirical has to do with what? Senses. Leave the mind alone. Senses. And how many sensory perceptions do we have as natural human beings? 5. Thank you, Fred. Again, give me one. You gave me those. Remember, you gave them to me earlier. You see, that's the thing. Sometimes when I ask my questions in the paper, you think I'm only coming at it differently. It's the same thing. Seeing, smell, touch, hearing. See, we experience reality based on these 5 avenues of data collection. How do I know this is salt and this is not sugar? Test. How do I know this is green, this is not white? Sight. How do I know this is solid, this is liquid? Touch. How do I know that this is fresh meat, this is rotten meat? Smell. That's how I experience reality. That's how I relate with the world around me. Alright? Now, that realm of epistemology, so the knowledge I receive, how I know what I know, through the five senses, we call that empirical. So when I refer to empirical data, I mean the data. Data means information, right? I mean the information I have through empirical avenues. What are the empirical avenues? Touch, smell, sight, hearing, and so on. Those empirical things, we could call them what? Evidences, okay? They get to the apologetic approach, which we call evidentialism. We've discussed this at a great deal. Evidentialism. Now we did this last week. Okay. Last week we did this. Today in the morning, we began to deal with the third category. We began to do the third category of an apologetic approach. When you're giving a defense of the Christian faith, apologia. Giving a reply, giving an intellectual defense for the truth claims of Christianity. You can also do that through these pre-existing ideas. That's what we said in the first lecture. And we made 2 points that are very critical. One, that no human being is epistemologically neutral. That they have pre-existing information. The reason why they are not epistemologically neutral is the fact of the fall and its effects. And we identify those effects are two. Number one, noetic effects. Number two, moral effects. So man is not coming to a debate about God as a neutral thing. He has ideas, isn't it? He has a hostility. He has an enmity. That must be overcome. That approach to apologetics pre-existing, we call them biases. You could even say ideas, preconceptions. That apologetic approach that comes through this, we call that what? Come on now, give it to me. What do we call it? Huh? Come on. We just discussed that. That was the burden of our previous lecture. Say that again? Presuppositional apologetics. Thank you very much, friend. The savior of your class today. It's doing very bad in this class. So presuppositional apologetics. Now what I've done is I have said this is sometimes what you might call reformed theology, all right? Reformed apologetics. And during the break, Jeff here was telling me that if he was made to choose between all of them, he would choose presuppositionalism because it has the correct view of man. That man doesn't come to any debate neutral. Man comes already biased. And not just biased, but antagonistic, we say. He comes as an enemy of the truth. Presuppositional apologetics. What I want to introduce now in this lecture is a fourth one, and I've told you that as I've continued to study apologetics and philosophy, this approach has commended itself to me again and again. Let's again be clear. When you're dealing with fideism, you're dealing with subjective feelings. Sometimes even irrational feelings. Alright? You could even say irrational here. When you're dealing with evidentialism, you're dealing with empirical data. You're dealing with evidences, providing proof. Alright? Assuming then that man is able to process those proofs. And Calvin here tells us we must be able to distinguish between proof and persuasion. What he calls indicia and fiducia. Two different things. But when you're dealing with presuppositionalism, you're dealing with what we call a priori assumptions. Things that we take for granted from the beginning of the debate. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got a fourth apologetic approach, like I told you, that continues to commend itself to my mind. It is that which we call the classical approach to apologetics. Now, I told you when we're dealing with presuppositional approach that great Christian minds, great thinkers, great philosophers, great theologians have fallen here in this category. And I've mentioned a man like Cornelius Van Til, in many ways the father of presuppositional apologetics, the guy who formulated it, defended it, and pressed it upon our consideration. And then, of course, a later guy who developed the works of Cornelius Van Til even more is a man called John Frame. But now we are in classical apologetics. And here, dear friends, we have titans, okay? We have titans, giants in terms of thinkers. I think it is here that you have non-Christian thinkers like Aristotle. That's a great philosopher who lived before Jesus Christ, I think. Aristotle. Great thinker. Non-Christian, Greek thinker, but great nonetheless. Now, again, let me warn you that most of the people, particularly the Reformed theologians, all right, who have objected to classical apologetics, some of the grounds they have adduced for their objection, for their rejection of classical apologetics, is that they see classical apologetics as being too Greek influenced because of the mention of people like Aristotle here. Okay? Later on you will have a man called René Descartes. I think he's a Frenchman. René Descartes. Again, a classical apologist. And people will, the Reformed people, presuppositionalists, will generally shrink from classical apologetics because they think classical apologetics is very secular in its approach. And the word is humanistic. Now, I told you this is a bit difficult, so bring your A game, because I'm engaged now with very, very subtle, very, very fine distinctions here. When the presuppositionalist approaches apologetics, they approach it from the standpoint that God is a fact, the Bible is a fact, man is unable to reason unless God helps him. Okay? So presuppositionalism jettisons, as it were, almost ignores the place of human reason. It has no place because of what Jeff has called before, noetic effects of the fall and the moral effects of the fall. Man is irrelevant in this matter because he is unable to receive the things of God. So let us not ask man to process, let us not ask him to reason. So the great battle has been between those two. Classical apologetics says, no. Wait a minute. Man has been created with the ability to process information. We grant, we accept that man is fallen, that the ravages of sin has affected his mind, that he has a predisposition a preconceived hostility towards God. We grant that. We accept that. But presupposition apologetics, the classical apologetics is saying there is still something of reasoning in the human mind that we can still appeal to. Now, I want to take a moment and really open this up in our hearing. Listen, we say that the basis of moral ability of man is the fact that man is created in the image of God. Right? Now, I made a big deal out of this in my certificate lectures. When I say our participation as human beings, our participation in the divine life, or maybe that's not a good word, our participation in the attributes of God, yes, that's the one, in the attributes of God. Is God wise? Is God wise? Are we being told to be wise? We can participate in some of the attributes of God. Does God have knowledge? Are we being told to pursue knowledge with understanding? We can participate in that attribute of God. Is God holy? Are we asked to be holy as God himself is holy? You see, we can participate in some of the attributes, particularly those that we call communicable attributes of God. And on what basis, therefore, are we able to participate in those attributes of God? On the basis that man, unlike the lion, man, unlike the giraffe, man, unlike the dog, is created in the image of God. Now, the second question that follows logically is, if man is created in the image of God. Now, you see, this is how you must think. This is what apologetics is trying to help you to think, because I'm thinking on my feet now. If we are created in the image of God, is that a correct thing to say? Is it correct? Okay. Answer for me a question number 2. Does that image of God in us enable us to participate in some of the attributes of God? Answer yes or no?
Yes.
Yes. So we have 2 premises. One is a solid fact. Men are created in the image of God. Solid fact number 2, by virtue of that image of God in us, we can participate in some of the attributes of God. We are agreed? Yes. Third question. And this brings us to a conclusion in this matter. When Adam and Eve, and therefore the whole of human race, fell in the Garden of Eden, was that image totally obliterated, totally erased? Think. Was it totally done away with? Or something remained? I think you're correct. Something of God's image remained in every human being, saved or not saved. And I've always argued that that is the basis of the so-called capital punishment, as it is presented to us in Genesis chapter 9, I think in verse 6. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man must his blood also be shed. What's the reason for that retributive justice? For man was made in the image of God. You kill a man, you are messing with the image of God. Whether that man you kill is a Christian or not a Christian. Right? I've argued before, haven't I, that the task of redemption, and I'm preaching that in our church platform here, from last Sunday, on glorification. That the very end of glorification is that we are being made like Christ. And is that an impromptu thing? Is that an instantaneous thing? No. It's something that happens gradually, isn't it? We become better. I'm not what I was yesterday. In other words, there is something of evil in me, but there is something of righteousness in me being worked out. So that when you read, for example, Ephesians 4:24, Colossians 3, verse 10, we are told that the task of sanctification, the task of renewal, is to be renewed back to the image of God in true righteousness and holiness, Ephesians 4:24, in knowledge, Colossians 3:10. Now then, what I'm saying then is that we are created in the image of God, premise number one. Premise number two, by virtue of that image of God in us, we are able to participate in some of the communicable attributes of God, like knowledge, like holiness, like wisdom, faithfulness, goodness, the fruits of the Spirit. But conclusion, premise number three, is this. The image of God was not totally lost in the fall of the Garden of Eden. It was destroyed, but not lost. It was mangled, but not obliterated. Now, I've always given this example. If you go to a perfect mirror, stand in front of a perfect mirror, and look at your image in that mirror, it is a perfect reflection of yourself. Is that true? What you see there is yourself. What if I should take a hammer and then hit that mirror so that it cracks every which way? The image I see there, is it a perfect reflection of me? It's not, but it's still my image, isn't it? But it's my image as it has been corrupted by the breakage. That is what the fall did with respect to the image of God. No wonder, when you read Romans chapter 2, verse 14 and verse 15, Paul says, the Gentiles who do not know or have the law of God still do the things that are written in the law. What does that mean, Paul says? It means the law of God is written in their hearts. They have something of an intuition. Something of an intuition of the law of God. Here's something else I want you to consider. I'll make a conclusion with regard to classical apologetics right up in a moment. When the Bible addresses people, and I've said you can see some presuppositional character in the Bible's approach, that is true, but you can also see something there. That when the Bible approaches human beings with the message of the gospel, it approaches them as humans with rational, this is 4, okay? With rational ability. Rational ability means simply ability to think and to understand. Surely, ladies and gentlemen, when God speaks to the children of Israel from Sinai and says to them, I am the Lord, your God, who took you out of the land of Egypt, out of the land of slavery, you shall have no other gods but me. And then he proceeds to give them 10 rules. And God is clear. Those rules are not just giving you in your heart, they are to be written so that you can read and obey. So when God says, you shall have no other gods, does he not assume that man knows what it is to have other gods? It's assumed. His rational ability to distinguish between right and wrong is assumed. Thou shalt not murder. They are assumed to know what murder is, so that when they killed a chicken, they did not consider it murder. They knew the difference between murder and killing. There's a difference, by the way. Murder and killing are not the same thing. I can kill a chicken, but I cannot murder a chicken. That's why in the court of law, there's nobody who is accused of killing. People are accused of murder, not killing. Okay? God assumes that these people have a rational mind. Isaiah chapter 1, for example. Isaiah chapter 1, verse 18. Come, let us come, let us reason. That's an invitation to exercise your mind, to apply your mind. Don't lose me, because all I'm doing is I'm giving background information to what is classical apologetics. I'll define it in a moment. Isaiah 26 verse 3, for example. Thou shalt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on you. The mind should be stayed on the Lord. The mind should be exercised. Philippians chapter 4, verse 7 and 8, particularly verse 8. Whatever things are good, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are virtuous, whatsoever things are holy, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things. Think. The Bible assumes you have a mind to think, and that mind can actually think. Right? So, Jeff, you see then that even with the noetic effects of the fall, we cannot jettison the mind. Because clearly Scripture doesn't jettison the mind. Rather, we are invited in Romans chapter 12 and verse 2, particularly in the context of worship. Finally, brethren, verse 1, I beseech you by the mercies of God, Romans 12:1, to present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to him, which is your reasonable act of worship. 2, do not be conformed to the standards of this world, but rather be renewed. Where? In your mind. So that we are called to think. Now, didn't I tell you, and we read this, I think, or was that in Acts 14, and in Acts 17, and in Acts 21 to 26. Acts 14, Acts 17, Acts 21 to 26, those chapters. Here's what you find there. In the earlier chapter, you find that Paul reasoned with them. That's the word, we read that. Paul reasoned with them on temperance and righteousness and the judgment to come. So compelling was Paul's reasoning before King Agrippa that King Agrippa says, Paul, in this short time, do you want to convince me to be a Christian? Really? Come on, Paul. And how about chapter 17? When Paul goes, and ladies and gentlemen, this is significant. Paul goes on Mars Hill. Now, this was a place within Athens, a Greek city, which was, as we say, the melting pot of philosophy. This is where people engaged in what we call theoretical thought, sending their minds out. Let us reason. Where is God? Where did we come from? Paul doesn't say, oh, that's Greek. That's Greek. That's Greek stuff. I'm a preacher of the gospel. That's Greek stuff. Paul doesn't say that. Paul actually goes to what they're calling Areopagus. Now that was the place, a raised place, where the speakers would stand and address the people on this new thought that came around. And Paul began to argue and to debate with them as rational human beings. So rational that he not only quotes scripture, he quotes their own poets, their own philosophers. 17 verse 28. As your own philosophers have said, in him we live, we move, and we have our being. There is the evidence. Think about it. Your thinkers are agreeing with me. So Paul wasn't saying, oh, you people have been so affected by the fall, you cannot understand anything. So Jesus is the only way. Oh, hey, accept it or leave it. No. He reasoned with it. All I've done in the preceding minutes is to simply say that the Bible addresses human beings as rational creatures. And by the way, even when we come to present the gospel, do we not present it to people who are supposed to reason and to think and to evaluate? Now, classical apologetics is that branch of apologetics then that begins with men's sort of, I refrain from using the word ability, but let's just use it loosely. Man's ability to process information. So whereas presuppositionalism refuses that presence of that ability to process by man, classical apologetics says actually man can process information. So let us approach the defense of God. This is important now. Classical apologetics approaches the defense of God and of the Bible by using rational argument. Not empirical evidence, but rational argument. Let us think. Does this make sense? If I'm arguing, for example, with a Hindu, and I've argued with a Hindu before, and I saw them having that little shrine where you have Hare Krishna, a Hindu god, a very small thing there in a shrine, and then they have these candles around it and incense burning, very sweet smelling. And I said, is that your god? And he said, yes, of course. And I said, did you put it there? Did somebody make that god? Yeah, somebody, very skilled people, and he was very happy to explain to me how the skilled people wanachonga in sanamu. So somebody made it, yes. And who brought it here? Me, I brought it here. And you created that shelf, yes. And you put your god there, yes. And what if you move this shore? I also move with the god. So you can move your god. What I was trying to do is to get this Indian to think how foolish what he's doing is. I'm engaging in rational thinking. You see, if this God is so powerful, in fact, I asked the question, what if something came of a shaking and it fell? It's marble. He said, it will break. I'm going to protect it. You are protecting your God from falling. And he laughed, you see, because it's ridiculous. What am I doing there? I'm using rational thinking. Just think as a human being. And by the way, I think there's one of the prophets, is it Isaiah? One of the prophets makes mockery of the God. He says, your God, you feed them, they can't feed you. You defend them, they can't defend you. That's rational thinking. Just think how stupid this thing is. You know? Classical apologetics. So when we're going to prove and by the way, from this moment forward, I will measure in dealing with unfolding of both presupposition. Really, I'll touch upon evidentialism and presuppositionalism because I think they have a synthesis, okay? A mixture with classical apologetics. But I will come at our apologetic approach from a classical point of view. And then we'll discuss the existence of God. Does God exist? Why do we believe God exists? Is there evidence for God? Should we presuppose, like I've said, the Bible does seem to indicate, because when the Bible starts simply saying, in the beginning, God, doesn't even bother to defend that thesis. Or is there another way that we can actually engage our thinking and come to a place where we can say, God exists, because the non-existence of God does not make sense? I was listening to an argument by a classicist, William Lane Craig, I think last week. And one of the evidences he will give, and we will give those evidences here, we'll talk about the moral argument for the existence of God. The fact that what I think Immanuel Kant, it is Immanuel Kant, I think, who called it the sense of oughtness. Huh? The sense of oughtness. I ought to. If I ought to, then there's a duty imposed on me. Should I kill? Or should I murder? Is that correct? Should I commit murder? Yes, no? Why? Why? Whose law? You see, when you think of moral duties, there is no way you can have moral duties if you don't have a higher power, okay, who has given the law, the breaking of which will attract a punishment. This is classical apologetics. Moral argument for the existence of God. Because if there is no God, then there is no right or wrong. There is only that which is done. And that is why we say in the West now, Europe, America, and now in Africa it's coming. I think they were saying in a place like Australia, 52%, more than half of the population does not believe there is God. In America, close to similar numbers. In Europe, similar numbers. Yes? And do you know what that has meant for them? It has meant homosexuality now is correct. The murder of children in the name of abortion is now correct. Euthanasia, so-called mercy killing, is now correct. Because once you remove God, there is no lawgiver. And if there's no lawgiver, then there's no law. We become a law unto our own self. You see what I'm saying? But once we begin to think, in fact, that's what I was telling her. There's a lady I met many years ago. She's an American lady, and we argued about the existence of God. And I said, do you believe there is evil? This lady. I asked her, do you believe there is evil? And said, of course. It's everywhere around us. But there's no God. Of course there's no God. But there's evil. Yes, there is evil. Where does evil come from? And we argued and argued. In the end, I brought her to a place where she could accept there is an author of evil. Whatever we call that author, it doesn't matter now. Some of us call him the devil, okay? You might call him whatever you want to call him. But there is this powerful thing that causes evil. Now, if there is evil, is there good? Of course, there is good. You see, I'm arguing from rationality, from the mind. Okay, good. So, who decides what good is and what good is bad is? Who decides that? Is it you Americans? Is it us Africans? Who? You see, in the end, you'll have to say, you call it God, but philosophically, theoretically, we say there has to be something or someone greater than us who has authority over us to impose rules. And on the basis of those rules, we say this is good and this is bad. Now, the only question is, what do we call that higher power? We call it God, okay? The New Agers will try to call it consciousness. In fact, right now, New Age culture has this thing they call the universe. In fact, be careful the television. I'm seeing in television and movies. Oh, just trust the universe. The thing will be okay. Oh, you're going through a separation. Trust the universe. The universe will take care of it. So, replace the idea of God with the idea of the universe. But it's still the same thing. Something higher than us. We are not the only ones who are here. There's something, someone higher than us. How am I arguing? How am I reasoning? I'm not reasoning from evidence. I'm not reasoning from presupposition. I'm reasoning from the mind. Okay? I'm assuming Florence is able to think. And to think clearly. And so I can convince her on the basis of rational thought. tomorrow when you come, in expounding more on on classical apologetics, I want to be able to tell you that men like Aurelius Augustine, the Bishop of Hippo, that's a reformed man, isn't it? Our reformed hero. He was a classical apologist. And Aurelius Augustine developed a theory. Now I'm going to say this short and then leave because I think I've loaded too much on your head today. So I'm going to say this and then leave. Aurelius Augustine developed a theory that, of course, we classify as classical apologetics. And he said, in order to prove the existence of God, we have to start the only place where we can. And that is with us. We cannot start proving the existence of God with God, because only God can start there. Right? We cannot go way back to eternity past because we were not there. Only God was there, and only God can do that. We can only begin where we are. And where are we? Let me confuse you and then leave you that confusion. I'll take you out of those books tomorrow, and I'll guide you out of it. Dr. Arsis Sproul makes an interesting observation, and I think this is something we ought to think about. And I've said it when I was defending the philosophical basis of the Trinity. Where do you live, Fred? Where do you live? By the way, I don't know. Where do you live? In Lumino. You live in Lumino. This is interesting. Where are you now? Oh, let's leave it because we're still in Lumino. So let's leave that. Let's take Washington, okay? And please give me a far place, okay? Like the place for God. Where do you live? Mungungune. That's about how many kilometers from here?
It's about between 25 and 30.
I don't think it's 30. It's about 20, 25. It's about 20, I think. Okay. So you live in Mungungune. But where are you now? Here. 20 kilometers away. Are you alive?
Yes, I'm alive.
Are you living? But where do you live? No, I'm confused. Because if you tell me you live in Mungungune, the implication is you don't live here. You only live when you're there.
So you mean I'm dead right now?
I don't know, you tell me. I'm trying to drive your mind to a philosophical construct. You do not live in Mungungune. You live where you are. That's proper English. Philosophically. You stay mostly in Mungungune, but you don't live in Mungungune.
So where you live?
Where you are. You sometimes go to Nairobi. The other day you went to Nairobi. You lived in Nairobi. Then you're living here. Where are you alive now? You are alive here. It's not a difficult thing, is it? You stay most of the time in Mungungune. But you don't live in Mungungune. You live wherever it is that you are at the time that you're alive. I'm alive here now. I'm alive here. I'm not alive in Nairobi because I'm not in Nairobi. If you should ask me the same question, I'm in Nairobi, I'll tell you, I'm alive here in Nairobi. But someone in Nairobi asks me, where do you live? And I'm in Nairobi. I live in Mumias. Well, not technically. You live wherever you are. You only stay in different places. Let's leave that for a moment. Let's push that philosophically even further. The reason why you told me that you live in Mungungune is because your consciousness is in Mungungune. You identify your life with Mungungune, your family with your future. So really, majority of your consciousness simply the awareness of your life, the awareness of your existence is defined by experiences which are being shaped up in Mungungune. Is that correct?
Yeah.
You don't live there, but the majority of your consciousness is there. I don't live in Mumias all the time. Sometimes I'm in DRC Congo, sometimes I'm in South Africa, sometimes I'm in Mombasa, sometimes I'm in Uganda here. I live there, but really somebody asked me, where do you live? I say I live in Kenya, Mumias, because that's where my consciousness is. Now there's one thing that is common between Mungungune and here Mumias, Lumino, is that you have a consciousness in both places. So if I'm to ask you, where exactly do you live? Your correct answer should be, I live in my consciousness. Do dead people live? Do dead people live? It's a simple question. Sometimes you think I'm trapping you. I'm not trapping you. Dead people don't live. You know? So, no. You just thought I was trapping you. You see, even if you went back to your house, where you told me you live in, and then you die there, well, you don't live there, do you? Because you're dead now. Death simply means you've lost consciousness of your environment, isn't it? You're not conscious of your environment. Therefore, you don't live anymore. But ladies and gentlemen, let me ask another question. Now, I'm only preparing for the lecture tomorrow because this will be important. Here's something else I want to ask you. Florence, if you die today, let me take it from you. Some of you fear death. If I die now, I die now. Do I stop living completely? Think now. Think now. As a Christian. Zacchaeus?
In the world that you have been,
Yes.
you step.
Uh-huh.
But in another world,
In another world,
you stay.
I continue. Now this is confusing. So I've stopped to live, but I've not stopped to live. In fact, my own example I usually give is if you see me die right now, this frame falls. The Bible calls it a tent, a glove. What happened when this frame fell is that I, Eli, stepped out of this tent and I moved into the presence of God. And what you're left with here is a rotting body. So who am I? Am I conscious in the presence of God? Luke 16. Was Lazarus conscious? Was the rich man conscious? So I carry my consciousness with me. Exactly. He's conscious. He's a way of pain. So now, who is me? I am not what you see. I live in what you see. I don't live in Mungungune. I live in what you see. Here. Because once this falls, I continue to live, but not in this. Just like you left your house in Ngungune, but continue to live here. You'll go to Nairobi, you'll continue to live there. Now, Francis Schaeffer, one of our great Christian thinkers, referred to that reality as the you. The you. There is the you, and then there's the you. There is the me, and then there's the me. Okay? This you see, and that which you don't see. I live there in that consciousness of me. So philosophy gets tricky, yes? So I live in my consciousness. Can I say that? I mean, it's clear. Well, that consciousness is in Nairobi, that's where I live. That consciousness is in Western Kenya, that's where I live. When I die, I stop to live here because I began to live in another realm. I'm conscious there. I'm not conscious here. Now, classical apologetics in the Augustinian tradition, and later on as it was developed by I think a Frenchman called René Descartes, okay, begins from there, that we can only begin from where we live. Which is to say, from where we have our consciousness and we begin to reason outwardly, if I exist, right, then something else has always existed. Because as Augustine thought about his existence in terms of epistemological reflection of who am I, that awareness of his existence came together with an awareness of what we call philosophically his own finitude. Or you could say finitude. Finitude. This idea that I have a beginning and I have an end. It's what we call finitude. If I have a beginning and I have an end, who caused my beginning? So I will deal with theories of self, eternal existence. Is that a theory we can embrace? No. Self-creation. Is that a theory we can embrace? I'll tell you, no. Created by a being that in the end has the power of being. This that we call God, okay? And those three theories I'm going to press upon your mind in the coming weeks in terms of our conception of the existence of God. Later on, a man, I've mentioned it in your hearing, a man called René Descartes would come up with a very fancy maxim, kind of a slogan which philosophers have quoted ever since. Cogito ergo sum. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Or I think, therefore I exist. But we will open up these things, okay? Don't worry about them. We'll open them up. We'll open them up. One by one. Is there any question now? Now, again, tomorrow we want to deal with some of these things in trying to open up classical apologetics and trying to just push that boundary further and further and further. Now remember, we are at classical apologetics. We are trying to use reason and rationality. And where can we begin? We can only begin from where we live. And where do we live? We live in our awareness. Where is our awareness? Our awareness is in the mind. So we begin there and begin to push outwards in the way of proving the existence of God, okay?